RAC members, if you're able to do so, if you could please pop your camera on, just to make it a little easier for conversation purposes. Everyone else, feel free to keep your camera off. And then I'll just remind folks to please mute yourselves while not speaking so we can eliminate any of the background noise. And Shelby is recording, so I believe that, yep, that has been done. So we are recording these as a reminder. Just a couple things before we dive into the agenda. I do want to remind folks on the charter, as we work through the rules, especially as we get past the definitions and start working into the body of the rule set, we're really going to be focusing on the 1, 2, 3 consensus polling. And so again, as a reminder, we're really looking for those 1s and 2s. I think we all know we're not going to get consensus on everything, but we're really trying to highlight the opportunities just to get support the rule sets as we get through. And we will go into the agenda, and I will do a quick roll call, make sure we got representation or who we have representation for the RAC members. So we'll go through that real quick. OFIC.
I'm here, Levi. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Leslie, representing citizens at large. I think I saw Leslie yet. Okay. County Public Health, either Sarah as primary or Carissa as alternate.
Good afternoon. I'm here.
All right, thank you. Industrial landowners, Randy or Stephen?
I'm here.
All right, thank you, sir. BLM, Mike?
I'm here.
All right. Associated Oregon Counties, either Jessica or Sarah?
Jessica Pratt's here.
Thank you. Prescribed Burn Associations, Sean Hendricks, probably still out on fire somewhere throughout the state. All right. Oregon Small Woodlands Association, Scott, I saw you.
Yeah, Scott is here.
All right, thank you. Southern Willamette Forest Collaboratives, either Sarah or Tim.
Yep, Sarah's here.
Right. Deschutes Forest Collaboratives, Pam or Jacob.
Pam Hardy here.
All right. Protection Associations, Tyler. I think I saw Tyler.
I'm here.
All right, thank you, Tyler. The Nature Conservancy, either Kai or Pete.
Pete Caligier here.
All right, thank you. Associated Oregon Loggers, Amanda or Matthew.
Amanda's present.
Thank you. U.S. Forest Service, Trevor or Stephanie.
Yep, Trevor is present.
Thank you. Wildland Fire Service, James or Seth.
James is here.
Thank you. Sustainable Northwest, Vernita.
Vernita is here.
Right. And Certified Burn Managers, Tim. None. Hearing none. Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Sayusla Indians, Armando.
Present.
Right. Confederated Tribes of Grand Ron, Andrew.
I'm on.
All right. The Klamath Tribes, Lacey. All right. And the American Lung Association, Carrie.
Carrie's here.
All right, great. Thank you all for working through that with me. So again, on our agenda, we got another half an hour of time today. So those that missed the meeting last week, we decided to make these a little longer, going another half an hour on these meetings. So hopefully everyone's able to stay on for that whole time. Just give us a little more time to work through some of this. So typical agenda, we'll have work session, public comment at 2 o'clock. And then if we don't have anyone on for public comment, then we will go right continuing to our work session up until 3:20. We'll have a stop at 3:20 just to wrap up. and talk about any next steps in the upcoming meeting. And again, reminder for non-RAC members or alternates that are not filling the role as the primary RAC, I ask folks to please stay muted. And at that 2 o'clock, I will open it up for any public comment for folks that are not RAC members to provide any public comment. And again, there's always written opportunity as well. Send any written comment in for the RAC. That being said, I think we will move right in, and I will get my screen shared up here. There it is. There we go. Everyone, can you see my screen, the rules? Awesome. Seeing some yeses. Great. So again, hopefully folks that was not able to attend the meeting last week, hopefully you had time to at least look at the recordings to get caught up to speed there. So we did leave off with this smoke intrusion definition that RAC members supported with no threes. And so the next topic of discussion would be this smoke incident. And again, there shouldn't be a whole lot to talk about. So in our proposed rules that we sent out, we recommended just deleting the smoke incident definition altogether. And nobody on the RAC was opposed to that. That's why there's no additional definition recommendations or anything there. So we will move right on. Same with smoke management forecast unit. That was a definition we recommended, and there were no comments from that when we initially sent these out. So everyone seemed pretty okay with what this definition is. Timber harvest. So this was the definition we recommended adding, and I did put a note here because I know it wasn't anywhere throughout the rule set, but it is now included in the definition of pile burning that we as a RAC recommended. So it is here in that definition, which is why we were thinking we would want to include it here. Is there any discussion there? Just because that is really, it's different because of that definition of pile burning. I guess I should ask, are there any threes to including that definition? Should be where I should start. And if no threes, are there some twos that maybe just need to re-wordsmith that? And as you can tell, we did just take this definition straight from ORS 321.005 as it was already defined. Go ahead, Amanda.
Can you just post the pile burning definition just so we can look at them both at the same time?
I can definitely do that.
Just put it in the chat. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Actually, might even put it right here. How's that? That work? Okay, and if nobody opposed, we'll keep working on through if there's no twos or threes. Okay. Under burning, so we did have one additional recommendation for a definition, I believe, Wildland Fire Service. So that was, so James threw in a different definition here. And then this was the one we proposed, other than a couple folks, I think, actually, if I remember right, recommended the low and added the to moderate intensity. So is there a recommendation to move one of these forward from the group? Yeah.
Did we capture the rangeland, grassland stuff in our broadcast burn definition? That's the main difference I see between the two.
Yes.
Is that-
Let's go
If we've
back.
already captured broadcast burning and we're comfortable with that, then I would suggest we go with the first definition.
I'll do the same thing. I'll copy that and I'll put it on a comment down here so we can all see it and try not to get you all sick. This is where we landed with broadcast burning.
I think that gets at the rangeland savannas, grasslands that are talked about here.
So I'm here in recommendation, since we got it covered, broadcast burning, is to include, go with this first definition here highlighted.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation because we've already covered those additional pieces of underburning and broadcast burning, and just limit underburning to being in the understory.
Okay. Anyone, are there any threes for leaving that as is? As Chad's recommending there?
So if I'm reading that correctly, then underburning is a subcategory of broadcast burning. Is that what you guys are, what we're getting at there?
Believe so. Go ahead, Chad.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be a subcategory or if components of it are captured. I think of getting a little bit into semantics here, but I think that that type of burn is captured, whether we call it broadcast or underburn. It is defined.
Yeah, that would be my second question then is, are we just repeating ourselves? If we're going to call everything broadcast burning, do we need to specify underburning? But
Amanda?
That's a really good point. Maybe we just don't need underburning if we've already defined it as broadcast burning and feel like underburning can fall within that category.
Right. Go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, I see where the train of thought is going, and I think I'm fine with this underburning definition. In my mind, it is a subcategory of broadcast burning. It's just specifying where that's happening with the overhead fuels. But my question would be, are there differences of how it is utilized through the remainder of the program text? So maybe we can just add a comment here to like circle back when broadcast or underburning occurs to make sure that if one, if underburning is in there differently and like requiring different things than broadcast burning generally, then we might have to think through, is it needed or not, or just thinking about how they both may or may not be applied throughout the program. But generally I'm good with the definition that's highlighted.
Okay, so I'm hearing we're still got support of leaving it. Also, there's a question on if it's actually needed. So I can make a note to circle back, be determined. So James, were you good with that as well?
yeah, I'm impartial to either.
Okay. Pete.
I guess just in the spirit of, if you're going to go back and sort of have a conversation, or we're going to discuss whether it's even needed in rule or is redundant with broadcast burning, I would be one to advocate for the inclusion of low to moderate intensity prescribed fire, simply because I think it's important to note that sometimes it takes moderate intensity fire to achieve the objectives that you're trying to accomplish.
And I think, yeah, that is, yeah. So that is part of that definition where folks, I think, are supporting having that moderate, low to moderate in there.
Yep, understood. I'm just saying, suggesting if you're gonna eliminate this one because it's you think that broadcast burning already covers it, maybe there's a way to insert the low to moderate intensity portion in the definition of broadcast burning.
Gotcha. I'm tracking. So what we will do is this one will be deleted. And as we move forward, when we circle back, we'll come and make sure we include that low to moderate in the broadcast if we determine underburning is not needed. Go ahead, Chad.
I guess I just wonder why we need to specify what intensity at all. Broadcast burning doesn't talk about intensity. Does it matter if it's low or moderate, or I guess if we leave out the language on the intensity, does that limit the ability to have a moderate severity prescribed fire? I'm just trying to pare down as much as we can to have less language as possible. And maybe we just don't mention the severity. I'm okay either way. I just think we should seek to have simplicity and less with the definitions in this.
Yeah, and so yeah, I guess I would pose, and I'll get to you, Amanda, here in a second. Would anybody be opposed to just whoops, track changes on here? So yeah, so I think it's why does removing this piece do anything that make people make that a 3?
Again, with an intent to say that it does, we're not so concerned about the intensity, and it may require moderate intensity. I'm not trying to say that it can only be low. I just wonder why we need to even prescribe intensity.
Right. Amanda?
To Chad's question, I think that's fine, removing that intensity piece. In addition, I just wanted to highlight to my comment about circling back. I just did a word search and it looks like primarily, at least underburning is utilized in the fee section. So just as a highlight of where there may be differences between how broadcast and underburning is assessed. So just wanted to highlight that.
And I think that's a good point of clarification there of my assumption is, yeah, it's how it's charged if it's an underburn type. So yeah, definitely one worth circling back then for when we get to the fees section. James?
I guess the only caution I throw out there is that broadcast burning was historically used to imply high severity post fire or post timber prescribed burning versus underburning, which has very clearly been established as a low to moderate, low impact on the overstory, typically type of burn. So if we're using, we just need to be careful. Underburning and broadcast burning historically have different contexts. If we're redefining broadcast burning in this document, we probably need to be clear that there are underburning activities that have low to moderate fuels, so that when we are talking with people, we have the ability to differentiate from an old school broadcast burn and a low to moderate severity or intensity prescribed burn. That's the only caution I throw out there.
Thank you, James. And I am getting kind of the gist of, it doesn't sound like it will make or break things if the definition is still included for underburning. So I do like Amanda's recommendation of circling back to give this more context when we get into the fees and how it relates there. So anyone opposed to leaving that how that is there and moving on? James, I couldn't tell if you popped your hand back up or must have just left it up. Had someone recommended defining variance. And if you don't remember, we can scroll down now that it's right here. Believe I've got two very similar colors. Was it you, Trevor?
I think it was us. It's just used within the text all over the place. Variance to the forecast, variance to X, Y, and Z. So just felt like something that might need to be defined to us. As a recommendation, that was it.
Any other feedback, comments on that, or anyone have a definition of variance we can throw in to at least start with?
I mean, just looking at some of the text, a burn boss may obtain a variance from the smoke management forecast. I think we all kind of know what that is, but for the rule set and the common reader, it seems like we would want to define what is a variance to the smoke management forecast. Any variance by the smoke management forecast unit, etc. So
Yeah, it sounds to me like it probably is worth defining. Pam has a perfect definition for us.
I don't have a perfect definition. I just looked it up on Google and it just said something like a change. So what's going to happen if we don't define it is that, it just goes with a standard dictionary definition of what variance means, which is the fact or quality of being different, varying, or in disagreement, which is kind of what you'd think. If we want to define variance and put some prescription around it, such as a small change or something like that, that's a policy move that we should just be aware of. And I'm just bringing that up. It might, if we want it to mean something other than just a change, we should put something in there. But if we're fine with the standard dictionary definition, I don't think we need it.
I think that's good context. Amanda?
Yeah, variance definitely comes up quite a bit, and as we get into more of the actual program technicalities, there's other places that I'm suggesting we allow variances. And as I worked through the rule set, what I did is in those sections, I sort of put qualifiers around the variance. So like a variance may include X, Y, or Z, because their variance what we're talking about when we talk about variance in different sections may be different things. So my suggestion is that we kind of move through the document, and if we feel like there is a need to be clear about what is or is not included, or what could be a part of a variance for a specific section, we clarify that in that section versus trying to have some blanket definition.
So kind of along with what Pam was saying there. So we're not tying ourselves to exactly what a variance definition is here. Give us some flexibility when it is specified. Trevor, what are your thoughts on that?
I support that. Yep.
Okay. Anyone opposed? Right. So I'm gonna remove this here. Actually, what I'll do is I'll just add a reminder to put that there, just that way, just in case when we do come back here, we can make sure we identified all the areas that variance is used. And so we can double check to make sure we did or did not provide clarity in that. Okay. Look at this. We're like almost done with the definitions. This is great. Vernita, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna note here before we moved on to the next one where there were questions that under vulnerable populations, I was going to suggest that we might add health sensitivities instead of just sensitivities generally. I mean, I'm sensitive to lots of things, but like I think we're probably referring to health sensitivities and probably health sensitivities that are impacted by smoke specifically, and just a suggestion there.
So address that here means people with specific health sensitivities, including but not limited to, and then you wanted to add smoke somewhere in there. Is that?
We might say health sensitivities either triggered by or impacted by smoke. So that way we know we're talking about specific kinds of health sensitivities, those that are affected by smoke.
Okay. And so that was a definition again that nobody had any additional changes to. That's why it wasn't highlighted or anything. And so with these additions, I guess, are folks still supportive of that? Or again, are there any threes? Anybody that can't live with it and will not support it? And if not a three, are there any twos that like it changed? Madam.
I just had a question, how this may vary from other definitions that OHA may have in regulation around vulnerable populations. Just trying to be consistent where we can, and if there's a real high need to vary from what OHA may have, just was curious.
And Gabriella, look at you, you're already set.
Yeah, there are, it wouldn't be a regulatory conflict per se, but there are standard definitions in epidemiology, in public health practice about who is what are sensitive populations. So this would vary from that. It wouldn't necessarily, like by definition, children are a sensitive population. They breathe at a higher rate and get more pollutants per pound of body weight, things like that. So that defines them as a sensitive population. So this isn't the way that we use the terms, but this wouldn't harm anything. People like this, it wouldn't contradict any regulatory standard or anything of ours.
Thank you, Gabriella.
I certainly don't have incredibly strong feelings about this, other than I would hope the policy would be clear in terms of the intention of this. I hear the term vulnerable populations used for lots of different things, and so I just wasn't sure if we should be specific about health sensitivities, as there are a number of ways that could be interpreted.
I think in the context, it's where it's used. It's in the context of, for example, community response planning to identify populations vulnerable to smoke. So I think in the context it's there, but if you wanted to, I think because it's, and again, I think this doesn't adversely affect anything. And I guess the other thing that we talk about, and maybe I take back my words, rather than impacted by, I would say at higher risk, because it's very challenging to connect a lot of environmental exposures to a particular health outcome because there's so many other things that cause the same or contribute to the same health outcomes. So we always focus on risk because that's what the research has told us from observing large populations of people or laboratory studies that you expose folks to PM 2.5 or other constituents, and then there is a health response from the toxicity or the mechanical impacts of smoke or whatever it is. So the risk goes up for every increment of PM 2.5 is what's the best studied, but so far, yeah, that would be more accurate.
Pam.
Yeah, I like where this conversation is going. I think Bernita and Gabriella have offered some really great nuances at higher risk of adverse impacts from smoke. And when I took a quick look again at OHA stuff again using Google, I thought it offered a nuance that was useful, and that is whose temporary or ongoing life circumstances require support beyond standard measures. So something along the lines of means people with specific health sensitivities at higher risk of adverse impacts from smoke, whose life circumstances require support beyond standard measures. And then maybe a second sentence, these can include, but are not limited to.
So tagging on after the smoke.
Yeah, I put it in the language in the chat, Gabriella.
Okay.
I'd love to hear your thoughts as somebody who's knee deep in the details.
Yeah. So in the emergency planning and context, they're thinking about like folks who are dependent on oxygen tank that needs to be powered, for example. So for planning purposes, that's an important, for that kind of emergency preparedness planning, that's important. Just for the sake of kind of being as streamlined and less words as possible, I think the definition, I might tweak it a little to say at higher, maybe remove health sensitivities with specific sensitivities at higher risk of adverse health impacts from smoke. And then if folks, I'm not sure how that verbiage from that emergency preparedness context would translate to the community response plans. It implies a certain commitment, so it could be things like a commitment to provide air filtration devices, for example. Like that might be a practical way, but I don't know if you want to tie the definition here to that sense of a commitment around something like that.
And
I mean, I would love that personally. If you all want to commit to making sure everybody has air filtration devices, that sounds good to me.
I think that's a bit of a heavy lift for the definition section.
Right.
And it is vulnerable populations does come up mostly in that CRP, community response plans communication. That's really where that's coming up mostly within the rules.
And the purpose there is for partners at the local level to identify those populations, to figure out what are the strategies for communicating to those specific populations, and what actions and partnerships are required to do that communication, and in some cases to provide those interventions. But that's going to be very specific to each community.
And Pete, I do want to address too. I see you dropped something in the chat there on EPA definition of vulnerable population.
Yeah, that's why so I would just say that this is including but not limited to And I would say that it's standard practice, for example, if you have public health at the table, that's built in, that they're going to be looking for things like, homeless populations, folks with less smoke resilient housing, things like that. People who start with a higher health burden. So I can definitely there's definitions about overburdened populations, for example. I know EPA uses that kind of language. So I'd be happy to look at, come back with some suggestions if people want to go in that direction. That certainly would align very strongly with OHA's strategic goal to eliminate health disparities in Oregon, which are tied to these kinds of socioeconomic factors. The life stage is already addressed by, mention of older adults, children, pregnant women. That's reflected in there already.
So pose something to the group. Oh, Pam, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, this conversation puts me in mind of a particular vulnerable population that we see a lot here in Bend, and that is people who are required to work outside.
Yeah, outdoor workers is a population that we flag regularly when we're communicating with folks.
And I'll just post. Oh, go ahead, Chad.
I think one of the key words that we started with was specific sensitivities, and this conversation is quickly becoming everybody is going to be sensitive. And so what is the purpose of having vulnerable populations if we're just going to say that everybody somehow falls into a bucket of a vulnerable population? So I do recognize that there are a lot of different categories that could make you a vulnerable population, but for the purpose of this work, let's try to stay focused on the specific sensitivities that are due to the smoke impacts. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, and I was actually going to try to get us to that point as well, Chad. So thanks for getting us there. Again, just kind of referencing in the rules that are already current rules. Gabrielle.
Yeah, I would say this is just to be helpful as guidance so that people from the outside know what are examples of the kind of considerations, and it wouldn't exclude looking at those other specific populations that are important in a given community.
So any additional, I guess, what's the RAC want to do with current definition here with some additions? Leave as is. Sounds like Gabriella offered to come back with a little more context too, if RAC is interested in that. And then I think Trevor dropped another definition in the chat as well.
I
think that, yeah, that
I
is a
lean towards
definition.
leaving it broad, and obviously the smoke management rules, so I think it ties together by function of a smoke management rule, but to me it's just leave it broad, don't actually suggest all these ailments potentially, which is covered by biological, social, and economic factors, whether that's an outdoor worker, a homeless person, or somebody with COPD. It's all covered there.
But I'm thinking, so what your recommendation is to delete this highlighted piece and add in groups of people who experience a higher susceptibility to environmental hazards due to biological, social, or economic factors. Is that's Is that what your recommendation is there, Trevor?
Somewhat, I guess. In the group think, I just feel like I would almost take everything. Vulnerable populations means groups of people,
Oh,
X, Y, and Z.
oh, okay.
And I get the idea of trying to connect smoke, but environmental hazard is smoke. And in the context of this rule, I think that's clear enough.
So people can see it here. So that's how that would read is vulnerable population means then groups of people. I got, so we got Scott, Gabriella, then Amanda.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, and this is in all honesty here, forthrightness is what about forest fighters? You know, I mean, they're vulnerable to smoke, you know, and I guess you can say that's their job. But you know, since we're enhancing these groups, they are a group that are subject to smoke for sure.
And Gabriella, then Amanda.
Yeah, and I was going to say it depends on to what degree you all these rules are helpful to more of the layperson population to illustrate what you're talking about in a way that's more accessible. If I think what Trevor proposed, you could make it smoke specific, who experience a higher susceptibility to smoke due to biological smoke exposure. You could do that or just leave it as environmental hazards. And if that's fine for the users of the rule that they, you know, it's not necessary to have specific examples that come to mind, then that would cover it. That more generic framing would cover it fine.
And to address too what Gabriella mentioned earlier is it is tied directly to those CRPs to where the local CRP folks, the county level, can decide exactly what those vulnerable populations are in order to get that communication out to them. So it can vary. Maybe that is easier by not having a bunch of the examples in definition. So it leaves it open-ended for folks to determine at the local level what they think vulnerable populations are, based off of limiting the definition without having examples listed. Amanda.
I am feeling uncomfortable with where this is heading into such a different direction than what current rule says. And I would be a lot more comfortable with what is currently written with the changes made in red. Personally, I feel like adding in the social and economic factors it is significantly different than current rule, where we're really focused on the health piece. So, anyways.
Okay. And so I'm hearing a recommendation of leaving it here, and that's kind of, and again, just to remind folks, when y'all did the initial review of these, nobody had any feedback or recommended changes on vulnerable populations. So at some point, everyone felt pretty comfortable of that definition that was provided, just to put that out there for folks as well as a reminder. So I think Amanda's recommending leaving this as is with these changes, right, Amanda? The additions, I should say. Okay. Any threes on that? Anyone fully opposed of just leaving this definition as is? And again, there's always the caveat is as we dig through the rules, when we get to CRPs and we start talking about vulnerable populations and more details, there's nothing that prevents us from going back up and changing it. Okay. No threes and twos? Well, there's probably some twos, clearly. So, but there's no three. Okay. We will continue on. Western Oregon. We had that defined, means the 18 counties lying west of Hood River, Wasco, and that is primarily in there because of the different regulation areas. So again, when we get to diving into the regulated areas, this may or may not be needed depending on where we land and fees and all that. So current as rules sit, anyone opposed? Well, no one was opposed, so we'll move on from that. A couple folks thought it would be good to put in definition of wildfire. So we got two different definitions. I think, yeah, Wildland Fire Service and Forest Service, I believe. Is that yours?
Yep.
Trevor? Okay.
Yep.
All right, thoughts there. Anyone want to make a recommendation or?
I'll offer that the term in green seems pretty simple and straightforward. It's unplanned ignitions.
Okay.
And the purple one, it says wildfires conducted by federal agencies. I certainly hope that's not the case.
Be managed.
Okay, so
I support that. I think we'll get
Okay.
to it in rule, so that's
Yeah.
fine.
Okay.
The definition in green, that works. The rest of that is tied to language in rule, I think.
yep,
Or
I think you're right.
proposed language in rule.
Yeah, proposed. Any threes? Okay. And there was a recommendation for wildfire hazard means.
I believe that
Don't
was
remember.
me, Levi.
Is that you? Okay.
I don't know if that would have, you all can tell me whether you think it would have bearing on actual how rules are managed, but there's a handful of references throughout the rules about either, sometimes the terms get a little squishy, fire hazard, wildfire hazard, constituting a fire hazard, and we don't define what fire hazard means or linking it back to specifically like the definition of the likelihood and intensity of wildfire. And again, not sure that that is something that would ultimately have bearing with how the rules are managed or how prescribed fire gets managed, but clearly linking it to an established definition so it doesn't run away from us could potentially be helpful.
Thoughts from the group? There, I guess, maybe as this is one as we work through, we could come back to as well to see if it needs to be addressed. Amanda, go.
Previously in forest fuels, we had wildfire hazard. Is that out now?
Oh, good question. Let's go look. Try not to make y'all sick. Forest fuels. So yeah, I don't see wildfire hazard.
Okay. That must have been previously. Just trying to see where there might be other places where hazard is included. But yeah, I mean, to your point, Pete, there's areas that talk about wildfire hazard increases as well as wildfire risk reduction, kind of going one way and the other way, right? And I'm hearkening back to the wildfire map and
How dare you?
WUI rules. And I don't know what still remains in rule elsewhere around this word wildfire hazard, and if there would be any other places for us to look at, Levi.
Yeah, that would be.
It's not
Go ahead.
anywhere else. I don't think it's anywhere else in rule. The only other place it kind of comes in is in 477, but that's fire hazard, not wildfire hazard specifically.
Yeah, that's
So
where I
we
was-
would be the first to offer a definition of wildfire hazard. I don't know if that is something that we want to do or should do. And then if we do, we need to be careful not to conflate that with wildfire risk and make sure that we're defining hazard differently than risk.
Yeah, I where I see this coming into play mostly in the rule set is probably under some of our kind of more like intent statement pieces on the necessity of prescribed burning and things like that, where this language is somewhat prolific. We may just want to be careful there not to use new terms and or amend those terms out just because we may not want to go through the hassle on this very last definition to spend hours and hours and hours circling our wheels, because I think we could all come up with something different from a technical and a political standpoint.
I guess I would just throw, I wasn't trying to open an unintentional can of worms. I thought that there were instances where there were elements where it sort of, it alluded to the state forester deems it constitutes a wildfire hazard or something along those lines. And to be honest, I'm having trouble finding it now, other than like you're suggesting, Amanda, that under the definitions, there's things around constituting a wildfire hazard. But I thought that there was other elements where it could get us into trouble down the road because we don't really define what, if the state forester deems it a wildfire hazard, what does that mean? But again, if it hasn't been an issue, I don't want to create an issue.
Yeah, and there's references in 526 for hazardous fuel removal, hazardous fuel loading. And yeah, there's a lot of hazardous fuel, and then fire hazard, that's where fire hazards come up. So that's in 526. And then Chad mentioned what was in 477.
Yeah, 477 uses the term fire hazard, and it might be easier to just amend our rules to say fire hazard instead of wildfire hazard, and then tie to the fire hazard definition used in 477.
Is there a definition there, Chad?
Yeah, I believe 477 uses fire hazard repeatedly. I can try to find it.
That might be.
Randy had his hand up and might be able to offer some insight.
Go ahead, Randy.
Well, there's the ability by the department to charge, used to be charge for extra hazard, which was really defined, I think in 477, and it was more related to old growth fuels and large accumulations of fuel. So it's kind of an outdated thing, and geez, in 30 years, I don't think anybody's ever used it as far as I know.
Yeah, the slash hazard, extra slash hazard rating. Yeah, it is very rarely used. It's used, very, very rarely, but I agree. It was really for the older days of old growth slash hazard. So 474, 477, yeah. Thank you. Gonna say, what rules are you looking at?
It's mentioned repeatedly in 477, but I don't think it's actually specifically defined. I think it's just a lot of deference to the state forester's judgment on the ability of that land to carry fire.
Yeah, and that's in 477, 580 is what Randy was referencing for additional fire hazards, and that's specific to additional. Yes, it's really slash, and then there's definition of additional fire hazard. Means a hazard that has been determined to exist by the forester pursuant to 580. So we could get going down a pretty big rabbit hole here.
Or we could just call it fire hazard and rely on the interpretation to date and how it's been in place for quite some time. That does offer a lot of deference to the state forester's judgment, but back to, are we fixing a problem or creating a problem?
Right.
So Amanda has her hand up. And
Amanda.
Yeah, I was just, I'm not against what you're saying, Chad, and what you're suggesting, but when I just did a word search for hazard, it only came up twice, and that one of them was in the old forest fuels definition, of which that got stripped out. And so my comment is, do we need to define it if, or maybe we define it here and then maybe do it the circle back of, do we actually want to use it where it's also found? Because
Right.
where it is found, where hazard is found, it's tied to wildfire hazard, and it's primarily in the necessity of prescribed fire, defining what wildfire hazard is, which is, densely packed trees, areas where fire has been excluded, management hasn't occurred, et cetera, et cetera. And so we could remove that word, that term, if we don't want to define it, then it wouldn't really show up elsewhere in the rule set, unless we chose to.
We propose we remove fire hazard and try to do our best to not use that term. If we come across it later in the document, maybe we can just offer a description there instead of the term.
Okay. Pete, I see you shaking your head. Okay. And I'm gonna leave this comment of or fire hazard just if we do have to come back to it, just for more context, so it will spark our memory. Wow, look at that. We're gonna scroll right into the body of the rules. So when I send these back out, it'll shorten up because I'll just obviously we're keeping all these on record on file, but for the sake of a shorter document, we'll delete these. Okay. Just time check, 1:58. Maybe we can start real quick. I just don't want to miss public comment. I also don't want to state it before two in case some folks actually jump on it too. Let me look real quick if we've had any additional folks. I don't think we've had additional folks jump on from the public. Not seeing any. So I'll just I'll do another call out here in a minute. So we're going right into the purpose. And so I did, for the sake of this meeting, I wanted to just put here reference and comment what statute says. And really, this was going to be my time anyway to just remind folks that as we work through the body of these rules, there will be some things that we are limited to based off of statute. And I'm going to do my best to, as those conversations come up, I'm going to do my best to try to make sure folks are aware of what we can or cannot do based off what statute currently says or does not say. So I'm going to try to facilitate that best I can as conversations come up. But just, I think it's a good reminder for folks that there are limitations based off of what's legally already in or not, in law or not in law. That being said, it's 2:00, so I'm going to ask folks for public comment. If folks are joined us from the public that would like to address the RAC, now would be your time. If you could just please raise your hand and we'll go through in order of folks raising their hand. A quick pause. Again, not seeing any names that I don't recognize, so we will keep going, and Shelby will monitor if we do get folks jumping on between now and 2:15. Okay, so that being said, we're going to continue right on. And so again, hopefully a lot of this, where there's no color, again, that's where folks didn't have any necessary recommendations, at least for the comments that we got back. There might be some other stuff based off of some conversations and definitions, obviously, that now we need to address, which is, I think, totally acceptable as we work through it. And then again, as a reminder, folks, our goal is to not try to wordsmith and to fully readdress everything on the fly. There's always opportunities where we can provide comment ahead of time and recommendations, and I can share those out to the group. Okay, so starting. So our purpose statement in current rule, you can see there was an addition for adding from prescribed fire and pile burning. in areas that they shall designate. So we'll start with these two paragraphs here. And I'll just ask the group if there's any 30s on moving on from that. And no, we can't kick DEQ out. They are in statute. Before y'all jump to that, I see Orman on there. Try to get you to laugh off the screen. There it is. Go ahead, Vernita.
A quick question here for the group. I wondered about changing the word. I know it says that we're managing smoke, but if we wanted to look at minimizing the impact of smoke, that's a modest change. I mean, ultimately, clarifying what managing smoke means. And I'll just be transparent as I'm reading through this purpose section of the document. I have this overarching question that I just put out there for the group about, like, are we able to somehow fundamentally change our paradigm from just managing smoke, meaning like affecting and dealing with smoke, to thinking about how do we allow or support like the degree of prescribed fire that we'd like to see with prescribed fire annually, so that we're actually managing the whole body of smoke, not just managing prescribed fire and pile burning smoke, but we're thinking about really shifting the paradigm to managing the whole system of smoke, which I think we kind of work around in this system of saying, like, we're trying to manage prescribed fire smoke, but it's in many ways to minimize wildfire smoke. So I just put that out there to the group to kind of see, is there a way we can collectively shift our paradigm and how we approach this?
Vernita, right out of the gate. What are folks' thoughts there, Sarah?
I totally agree with that, with what Vernita's saying. And as a community that's, been impacted by these rules and trying to comply, it's hard. So are we trying to manage this little, few months of prescribed fire smoke that we might have and trying to minimize that and just ignoring the rest? Or are we trying to, make some headway on reducing our risk to our community by managing the forests and the fuels? And the way I read this rule the first time I went through it, thinking it with this lens, I was like, man, it's just going to take so much work to shift that, if that's really what we're trying to do, because how it reads right now doesn't necessarily support that approach. So just my thoughts.
Okay, Chad.
I like the term managing smoke and don't think that it is in any of our best interest to have any language saying minimize smoke. It is going to be impossible to increase the pace and scale of prescribed fire while at the same time minimizing smoke. And I think really what we're trying to do is manage that smoke. When it's produced, where it's produced, and where it goes. So I guess I really like the term managing smoke and would caution us to avoid minimizing smoke. We're minimizing the impacts to vulnerable populations and to Oregonians. We're not minimizing the smoke because we're going to get the smoke one way or another, prescribed fire or wildfire. We can manage it if it comes from prescribed fire.
And just before we get to Seth and Pam, and I dropped a couple references again in statute here that managing smoke is referenced several times in statute under what the plan shall do and what the policy is of the smoke management plan. It is to improve the management of prescribed burning. And so that's why this is pretty specific here, managing smoke from prescribed fire. So I just want to highlight that it does reference management several times there. We'll go Seth, then Pam.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment that kind of aligns with Chad, and that, in increasing the amount of prescribed fire that's conducted, the idea of that might be counterproductive to actually minimizing smoke. And in choosing favorable burn windows and improving and utilizing basic smoke management practices to manage smoke is the goal. To minimize smoke, maybe a reduction in amount of prescribed fire, which I don't think is the group's goal in terms of this rule. And as we discussed, potentially kind of steering beyond prescribed fire, I would have concern there if we start discussing managing smoke from wildfire and as it relates to incident emergency response and suppression activities. I think that that's outside of the scope of smoke management plans in this rule. So wanted to express that to the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Pam, then Michael.
I think a lot of good points have been brought up here regarding thinking about this in terms of the larger issue of reducing wildfire smoke as a whole. That is well beyond the scope of what we can do here, but one of the things that we can do here is acknowledge the other half of the policy that has been stated several times in the course of our conversations, which is the state policy of maximizing prescribed fire, and that the purpose of this set of rules is managing the smoke to minimize impacts while also carrying out that other policy. This is not the place where we have that policy, but this is a place that we should be acknowledging that other policy, especially if one of the purposes of these rules is to help educate the public about what we're doing.
Thank you, Pam. Go Michael, then Gabriella.
Yeah, super interesting discussion. I appreciate everybody's perspectives on it. I hate to call back to definitions after so briefly leaving them, but maybe that's something we need to revisit in the future. Just what do we mean by minimize emissions? Because I think when I hear that word, I think of certain things, and I'm not thinking of it the same way as other folks have been saying now. And I think managing and minimizing, they might be perceived as the same thing, or they might be different. So the legislature has directed us to carry these two lofty goals of maximizing our ability to use prescribed fire and minimize wildfire risk, and at the same time minimize impacts to the public. And there's ways that we're doing that are working to better understand how you can reduce fuels in the forest before you light an understory burn, for instance. Or it could also mean, how are we helping people be aware of smoke so that they can take actions on their own through these community response plans? So yeah, I don't know if we need to dive back into definitions now, Levi, but maybe a note for the future for us to revisit as we keep marching through the rules.
Thank you, Michael. Gabriella.
Yeah, I think just building on that and hearkening back to many conversations that we've been in, Trevor, around social license, increasing the pace and scale significantly, maximizing whatever that is. If it's hard from this vantage point where there's such small acreages relative to the need that are being burned, to envision a future where there is that so much prescribed fire that it could cause that social license to be affected. The social license that will still be in the process of or needing to be built. And I think about being able to tell community all these steps have been taken on the land management side to, as Michael was just saying, to minimize, and it could be a different word or a defined word, the smoke that will result from prescribed fire, and being able to tell that to community so that by the time the fire is lit for prescribed fire, people know that, yeah, they're going to get smoke, and partners on the land management side have done as much as possible so that progress on prescribed fire isn't all on the back of community, right? That there's that it helps build that trust and that social license. So I just wanted to offer that thought in the context of a future with, hopefully, we all hope, right, a whole lot more prescribed fire.
Thank you, Gabriella. Vernita, then Chad, and then I know Pam dropped something in the chat there.
Yeah, this is a really great discussion, and I just wanted to clarify. I sometimes think the words maximizing and minimizing, as somebody else had said here, probably not the best words for us to use. I think about like limiting impacts to populations, for example. I just get concerned that if we try to minimize those impacts rather than limit those impacts, that we may end up not getting what our priorities then are, which would be like really increasing the amount of prescribed fire that we can do. So as we think about this going forward, I know this is a smoke management RAC, but I like the suggestion of thinking about limiting the impacts of smoke, and then collectively just putting it out there for us to think about as we think about like if we're really trying to collectively limit the impacts of smoke. There is a role that that wildfire does play that prescribed fire has an impact on. It's not a direct impact. We're not directly monitoring or managing that wildfire smoke, but we are directly, like indirectly reducing the likelihood of having that large body of wildfire smoke. So there is a role in the holistic system. So as I'm thinking about this, like just really opening that up to say, like, how do we really look at what we need to do from a management perspective? And then appreciate you all working together as we go through this to see how we're going to do that inside this policy. And I think it's a significant challenge.
Thank you, Vernita. Chad?
If I just propose that we continue to have the word manage in the upper definition 1 there of 477013, that we are managing smoke and we're seeking to minimize the impacts to the public and perhaps visibility for number 4 there, 4A, because we aren't at all suggesting we need to minimize smoke. In fact, we will necessarily see more smoke if we increase pace and scale of prescribed fire. We're trying to minimize the impacts to the public. And so I just want to make sure that we're not confusing those terms. We're managing smoke to minimize the impacts to the public, or to manage the impacts to the public, as Pam suggested in the chat. I think that is really great. I just don't want to have language in here that ends up tying our hands and say, oh, we need to minimize the impacts, so we're going to minimize the smoke. We cannot have a smoke management program that increases pace and scale hamstringed by this requirement to minimize emissions. It's where do the emissions go and who do they affect that we should be worried about.
Yeah, and I highlighted there what I believe you were addressing for 4A. So it is, we do have currently in the rules, one of the objectives of the smoke management plan is to minimize smoke impacts to the public. So that is added down here. So Amanda, then Michael.
Sorry, I had to take a phone call really quick. So I know we've moved down to 4, but
we're still up on the top. We're just going back and forth.
Okay. Well, sorry for
No,
not
you're good.
participating for the last minute and a half. But one thing I just wanted to highlight, I am a little bit uncomfortable with the way that 1 is worded, where it sort of is tying back to 477013, but it's not the same verbiage. And one suggestion I may have in order to make sure that we are aligned, but recognizing this is rule and not, the statute, maybe we say something like in conformance with ORS 477013, or in order to carry out ORS 477013, because then that gives us a little bit more freedom to further interpret statute for the purposes of the regulatory program. But I am not a lawyer, so maybe one of the other lawyers on the call has a better way of doing that. I just don't want to get wrapped around the axle where we're kind of sort of paraphrasing the statute in rule, but we're kind of adjusting it to.
Yeah, I'm tracking there what you're saying too, because yeah, especially by adding like language like this, it does deviate for what's already in here. So yeah, I'm open for some additional recommendations on how to state that. Michael, then Trevor.
Yeah, and Chad, I agree and understand where the reasons why you're saying the shift from minimized to managed, and I think as we dig into the proposed changes and this enhanced community response plan concept, and we talk a little bit more about the origins of that and the West Bend pilot, I think and inevitably we will need to revisit the purpose statement here because it is a paradigm shift in how the program's been operating. And but back to Levi's point too, I'm also trying to keep in mind what the statute says and the authorities given to the Board of Forestry and the Environmental Quality Commission, how we adjust that. I think we've got some opportunity to explore that, and I'm open to that. On the call here is DEQ.
I think Michael. Trevor.
Yeah, I was just going to support Amanda. I mean, I think the purpose is stated, and I mean, one is part of the purpose, and we should just leave it as is, remove the prescribed fire and pile burning piece, because I think that comes in later in sort of the objectives piece. And then all these discussions I think we're currently having probably will be highlighted as we continue to scroll down the page here.
Okay, so I'm thinking, or what I'm hearing is actually not including this highlighted piece as it's touched on into the smoke management plan and further down in the rules.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Anybody opposed from this? And I want to double check this R2 and shall. So that does say in statute the plan shall shall designate. So I do think it probably is more appropriate to keep the shall in there to match the statute. Okay. These first two paragraphs, great conversation, and I agree. I think we will be coming up in a lot of this. We probably will have to come back and revisit the purpose and as we move through the document. Pam.
2 points. The first one is super small. Under 1, plan for managing smoke impacts rather than just smoke.
Plan for managing smoke impacts here.
Yep. And the second one is something that I said before. I think an important thing to highlight at the beginning of our purpose section is that the purpose of these rules is to both manage smoke impacts, and allow for the legislative policy of increasing prescribed fire, which is noted in our in these rules, and it's way down. It's not coming up for a good chunk of time. It's just before history, and it's under the necessity of prescribed fire. But we do note that ORS 477522, this legislature and the Board of Forestry have found it necessary to maintain increased prescribed burning as forest management practice. I think that needs to be said up front to help people who are reading these rules understand that these rules are a balancing act.
And what was the statute that you said that specified increasing?
It's ORS 477552.
552. Okay,
And,
so it's right
yeah.
here.
And
Should
it's
be.
referenced at the bottom of the section entitled necessity of prescribed burning.
Just this next section here. Okay, so right
Yeah,
here.
there it is.
Yeah, so moving this up into the purpose statement.
Exactly.
I think probably makes pretty good sense to me. So let's see what that looks like. We're about thinking right up front.
I think there's a few different ways it can be done in an effort not to do too much wordsmithing with a huge audience. Let's get it in there and think about how to iron it out, perhaps over the course of our next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then come back to it and make sure that the way it got ironed out is amenable to all. Unless somebody has a great vision, like right off the top of their head, which is not me.
Yeah, I think that is a good addition to move up front here. Sorry, Bernita, go ahead.
I'm not saying I have a great vision, Pam. I like where you're going with this because something you said was really about managing for the trade-offs associated there. And I think a statement of that kind up front somewhere where we're talking about managing those trade-offs would be really helpful. So maybe we could just make a note of that, Levi, and somebody can do some great thinking.
And a note, what specifically?
That we are, that this involves managing trade-offs, that we're really making decisions that are trade-offs between public health in the moment and wildfire, risk of wildfire and prescribed fire smoke, just that there's some sense of managing trade-offs here that we could highlight up front. And I think that gets toward a little bit of the paradigm shift from my perspective, is like acknowledging that so that that balance is recognized in whatever we're putting together.
Okay. I think that's good. A very good discussion right off the bat. See, I knew you all had thoughts on this purpose statement. You just didn't want to share them initially. I knew there was going to be more thoughts. So good. We will move. Let's move down to these. So the smoke management rules together with. So for some context here, so the current smoke management plan is identified as a directive, an Oregon Department of Forestry directive. And I wanted to make the recommendation of just removing that title as a directive. So we don't always have to keep it as a directive and keep it maybe as a policy for the Oregon Department of Forestry rather than a directive. So that's why you'll see this deleted throughout the document. And again, the number scheme isn't even relevant anymore for how we number our directives and policies. It's all outdated and it changes. And so in the event of it changing again, I just wanted to remove what it was titled altogether and just title it as what it is. It's the operational guidance for the Oregon Smoke Management Program. So all that being said, that's why a lot of this directive policy stuff and the numbering is deleted throughout the rules. Hopefully y'all are good with that. As far as what that smoke management plan is called, that's in statute of the smoke management plan. That shall approve a plan. So smoke management plan is probably the most accurate title for that. And then what the document is that we put together with ODF and DEQ approves is the operational guidance for the Oregon Smoke Management Plan. So that's the context there. Amanda, go ahead.
Just a process question in reading the statute language here and then the order of operations. It looks like DEQ and ODF are supposed to develop the plan and approve it simultaneously. But the way the rules are written, it looks like ODF develops it and then DEQ approves it. So what is the actual process?
Definitely going to lean on Michael on that one. Go ahead, Michael. You already got your hand up.
Yeah, good question. So there's lots of plans and lots of guidance and different words that we use here, and the DEQ's role and the Environmental Quality Commission's role is to submit a state implementation plan. So it takes ODF rules and it says to the Environmental Protection Agency, this is how the state has determined that we're going to manage smoke to protect public health. And we are reviewing that against the Clean Air Act requirements with EPA. That's the check that we do. And we are grouped with ODF in statute by the Oregon legislature to develop it together, because ODF's purview and experience is prescribed fire and forest management. That's not DEQ's. And we're air experts and Clean Air Act experts. And so we're working together to develop that plan. The version of the rules that you all are looking at have been developed by DEQ and ODF and OHA together. And so that's the starting place of the conversation. So we've already done an initial gut check against Clean Air Act, and we're talking about this as we go along. In the September EQC, Environmental Quality Commission meeting, we'll do an information item with ODF and OHA to talk about the current status and the conversations that you all are having at the rulemaking, and get them ready for having a deeper dive conversation when we, after public comment has started on the rules, and their ask from us would be to approve the package to submit to EPA for review. So we're doing, in 2018, we did that whole effort at the same time, and that's our intention as well, is to say, Board of Forestry, do you approve the rules? Shortly after, EQC, do you approve the state implementation plan? And we're briefing both bodies at the same time.
Thank you, Michael. It's like you've done that before.
Yep.
So with that extra context, so yeah, and are we still running into maybe a difference of order operations between rule and statute? Amanda, go ahead.
I guess to be clear, I mean, we just talked about EQC, but like Board of Forestry is not in here. So I guess maybe it would make more sense that to instead of saying sort of like this entity approves it and then that entity approves it, or the state forester promulgates the rules and then EQC approves the plan. It just seems a little odd to me. So maybe it'd be better to say something like both the Board of Forestry and the EQC basically, will or need to approve the plan for submission by, whatever Michael just said, to submission to EPA for final review or something like that. I just, here it looks like it goes from the state forester to DEQ to Secretary of State.
Yeah,
where
I see what you're saying, Amanda.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I don't know if there's like, I mean, the point is that it has to be sort of approved by both agencies, and both agencies, boards or commissions, in order to finalize those rules.
And I think so. The state forester promulgates the rules. The Board of Forestry approves the rules. I don't think the Board of Forestry approves the smoke management plan, though. That is what's approved by DEQ, I believe,
I think we can nuance that offline, Levi, and just clarify process. But I think the intention of that statement is to say that both policy boards need to be in alignment on this. This isn't just one or the other. That we're working on this together. And the more I think about it, I don't even know if there's value in having that statement in there or not. But
well, yeah,
it's more process based.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, considering it's in statute already.
Right. So look, we can talk more about it, but I appreciate the discussion, and I hadn't looked at it. I hadn't thought about it that way before, so that's good.
Okay, so I'm going to make a note. And then, so the objectives of the smoke management plan. So again, this is really a lot of verbatim from what's in statute. So A, minimize smoke. And then there was an addition, impacts to the public and visibility resulting from prescribed burning as described by 477552. Which is
that deviates from 552, but
right, does
the reality, which we've already kind of chatted to, like this concept of minimizing emissions from prescribed burning is not the intent of the rule, or as we see it, seemingly. That's what I'm hearing. It's to minimize impact. So I don't know how we get past this statute rule thing if we're gonna, and Amanda maybe provided some suggestions in that realm, but to me the rule is if you want to minimize emissions, then you just don't have a prescribed fire program. That's how you minimize emissions, but we are really looking to minimize impacts of those emissions.
Right. And again, like I addressed right up front when we got into the body of this, is it's going to be potentially a little clunky based on what's currently in statute and where we want to take the entire program. And I think that's okay. My job is to address these things, obviously, when we do go up to the Board of Forestry, that, what limitations we may have had when we talked about updating these rules. So I think our only option, again, throwing it out there, is to write and rule what's in current statute. I don't think we have to go off of what's in current statute. So other than that, we can't really do anything unless statute changes. So based on that, current statute is listed here in 552. And so I almost think we do have to keep it as emissions. Thoughts, Amanda?
I mean, couldn't we just reference the statute and then say something like, in order to comply with the Clean Air, like the, National Clean Air Act or something like that? Seems like this could be a lot more simple. I mean, the whole purpose, I think, could probably be a lot more simple by just indicating that the purpose of this rule set is to comply with 477013 and 477552 in creation of a smoke management plan for the purposes of compliance with the Clean Air Act or something like that. I don't know. I feel like you go round and round and round.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and then, right. I mean, I hear you there.
I mean, we're saying the objective. I mean, I don't know. It's just, we're going round and around. I don't know if minimize emissions was the proper terminology for the statute, truthfully, to be consistent with the air quality objectives of the Clean Air Act. I don't know if it's verbatim, you will minimize emissions in there. Michael, you might know, but I think they're two distinct things, and we're using statute to provide objectives, which I don't think is, I mean, those are the overarching policy elements, but the objectives of the plan, I think, don't necessarily have to reference statute per se. We've already done that above. So what are the objectives of this smoke management plan? Which to me is minimize impacts to public and visibility, which the Clean Air Act is basically set to do. And correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but I'm not sure, like, the Clean Air Act does not say thou shalt minimize emissions completely. Thou shalt manage emissions in a way to reduce impacts to X, Y, and Z, whether that's water, human, environment.
No,
Go
you're
ahead,
right,
Michael.
Trevor. And it's, I think the reality here is just that the program that we're discussing now is very different than the program that was originally designed when the statutes were first adopted. And I think at that time, the legislature meant minimize emissions. So the program was no smoke into communities, no smoke into SSRAs. That was the objective.
Yep.
And I think the way that we're talking about minimizing emissions is different now. And especially with the need for increase of pace and scale and the the way that we're trying to approach minimizing impacts on the public through that enhanced community response plan proposal and changes to the rules. So yeah, I think that the statutes give the boards, the Board of Forestry and the EQC, the ability to determine what that means, and how we go about minimizing emissions. So I don't think it's like, I would not perceive that as limiting us in being able to make the adjustments that the agencies are proposing to the RAC for input on, but it might limit how we wordsmith the purpose statement, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And we'll go Chad and then Vernita.
Vernita had her hand up first, if you don't mind,
Oh,
Levi.
Sorry. Yep. I had my 1 and 2 crossed.
That's fine. Yeah, as we read this, first off, we can all see that there's an inherent tension between or among these different objectives listed here. And I wonder if we just want to call that out in the statement by the number, like the objective of the smoke management plan, or the objectives, sort of like maybe the objective of the smoke management plan is to balance, to strike the best balance possible, or, find some way to talk about that in that statement to balance these objectives below, and then it kind of calls out that inherent tension that's listed there that we can all see. And I don't have the word thread, I didn't jot it down here, but we could certainly put something together.
Yeah, it might be good to have if you have kind of an idea, at least for that number 4, for wordsmithing it, if you could drop it in the chat. Or again, when we circulate before the next meeting. Chat.
Thanks, Levi. That 477552, there's just 2 things in there, and the second one is to minimize the smoke emissions from prescribed burning consistent with the Federal Clean Air Act and Oregon's Clean Air Act implementation plan, and also to improve the management of prescribed burning. So we've already said that we're going to be consistent with the Clean Air Act and Oregon's Clean Air Act implementation plan earlier in the document, correct? I thought we had the whole discussion around.
Yeah, within the purpose statement here.
Mm-hmm. So I'm fine leaving minimize smoke impacts to the public or minimize emissions from prescribed burning, as long as you include consistent with the Clean Air Act. Because once we've become consistent with the Clean Air Act and met the PM 2.5 requirements, then there is no more need to minimize further. Like, that's just saying we need to minimize them to be in line with. And so then it reduces some of that tension of how do we increase pace and scale and reduce emissions from smoke. We're going to have more smoke, and we're only trying to minimize it to the point that it's consistent with the Federal Clean Air Act and Oregon's Clean Air Act implementation plan. So I guess that would be a proposal, is to leave that in there, but just drop in that second piece from ORS 477552, which is minimize emissions from prescribed burning consistent with the Federal Clean Air Act and Oregon's Clean Air Act implementation plan. So that is not to further minimize beyond or below what those thresholds are.
And that would be an objective under the smoke management plan. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Well, we reference 477552 and 4A. So 4A could just be
number 2
the
here in
exact
policy.
language of 477552 sub
Gotcha.
2.
It could be this. We'll see how this works. There we go. Just a copy and paste from.
Right. And if we're going to do that, I think we should also include 477551, which
Right.
is really the purpose of the plan, increasing pace and scale prescribed fire, and the second objective. But by leading with the number 1, it just sends a signal that, you know, we are truly dedicated to increasing pace and scale prescribed fire. And this is another consideration around smoke. So then you end up with, 4A and B. And then we're anchored in existing law.
Thoughts from the group there? So Amanda, then Pam.
Yeah, I think I just keep coming back to, like, I agree with Chad, what he's proposing here. I would argue that this 4AB and then, you know, the requirements of the plan in 477013, like, that is the purpose of the plan. And so it just seems like we're very wordy here, and in a purpose statement, we're not only providing a purpose and relating it to statute, but then we're providing objectives. It just seems like we're complicating it when, I mean, the whole purpose of the plan is to comply with these statutes.
I mean, and just, to reiterate, I mean, that it does, for the purpose of maintaining. So it'd be all the way, it'd be this whole.
And I guess
Right.
what I'm saying is, why reiterate it when you could just reference it in rule?
Point everything directly back to the statutes already listed.
Yeah, why accidentally write something different and then be out of sync with the statute?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, okay.
Yeah, I fully support what Amanda just said, to be fully in compliance with the statute. I think that's a really, really key thing for us to do here. And as I have poked my nose into ORS 477 with a little bit more depth, literally, as we've been sitting here, and I'm admittedly embarrassed that I didn't do it before. what I'm recognizing is that the place that we actually need to go to reference the policy is 477-005, 1, specifically 477-005-1, preservation of the forest and conservation of forest resources through the prevention and suppression of forest fires. And then later on in this rule, we have an explanation about why prescribed fire is a tool for doing exactly that policy. That's that whole next section on the necessity of prescribed fire. I hate to throw something additional in here, but if we want to get clear about what we're actually referencing, that's the number we need to say.
Yeah, the 005 is the policy for the state
Yeah.
of Oregon for ODF, for essentially why we exist.
Yeah.
And then the 013 is specific to, the smoke management plan.
Exactly. And the smoke management plan is one of the methods of carrying out this larger policy. But as Vernita and some other folks have pointed out here, I think really well, we need to talk about the tension. We need to talk about the fact that we have this role of both increasing our ability to manage the forests, and prescribed fire is so eloquently described as an absolutely essential method further on in this very document. We need to talk about we need to talk about the policy, but we also need to talk about the impacts of this policy and how this particular little section is managing those impacts in light of this larger policy.
Amanda?
I guess something I just want to make sure we're clear on, and make sure that people kind of know how I'm thinking about this. I think I think we're 100% within the bounds of the statute to increase the amount of smoke coming off of prescribed fires, while also minimizing the impact or minimizing the smoke, utilizing appropriate forecasting and practices outlined in the plan on any given burn. And that to me is really the purpose of the plan. And that's what this 477552 is really trying to get at, right? Like, we can do more, we can put more smoke into the atmosphere such that we are still compliant with the Clean Air Act. And this plan helps us do that in a way that minimizes any one fire's smoke output, right? Now that's wordy and a little bit hard to articulate here, but just to be clear, like there is a tension there, I agree. But I think there's actually less tension than we may be making it out to be. In a way, because you kind of have the ceiling of how much PM 2.5 and other clean air requirements, what comes from the fires, but doing things the right way, which is what's outlined in the plan, helps us do more of that, if that makes sense.
Additional thoughts from the group? Chad?
Yeah, I would just suggest that maybe recognizing those tensions, whether they're real or perceived, might be better done in a report rather than in the actual policy. I don't know what utility having our policy describe the tension and the situation is going to serve. I think the policy becomes what it is, and then we can talk about how the policy has some tensions, but I'm not sure it is helpful to put it actually in the rule itself. I mean, we all recognize that there are tensions, and others will also. We can talk about that, but I don't know if the rule is the place to do that.
Sarah?
Maybe we put a pin into it and come back to it
when we get further on through the changes that might happen through the rest of the rule. But as a community that has a CRP and has this role of educating the public, but also prescribed burn bosses and land managers on what they can do and are allowed to do, and finding comfort with that, having a bunch of references that they have to reference back to that they're not going to do. I think if it can be simply and cleanly done, it might be worth it. But I also, like I said, I really like where this conversation is going. I really appreciate that we're having this, and I think that sets us up well for the discussions we're going to have. So maybe it's put a pin on it and come back to it and decide after we get some more changes.
Okay. Thoughts from the rest of the group?
I mean, I
Anyone
think
opposed?
that's
Go ahead, Trevor.
I think that's fair. I'm just going to say it again. I think the meat of the objectives of the plan is what we need to be focused on. The policy of the state is already defined for us in 013 and 552, and the objectives need to certainly tie to that policy. But right, this section 4 to me is us saying what this plan is all about. I think we're all on a similar page about how we define that moving forward. And this minimize emissions thing is catching us, but I think we can wordsmith that, whether it's minimize smoke, minimize emission impacts to, I mean, that's the objective that we are trying to achieve through this plan. Not just completely eliminating or fully minimizing emissions. Anyways, I'm throwing spaghetti on the wall at this point, but to me, the objectives they're driven by the policy, the overarching policy, and now is our opportunity to say, hey, what this is how we are going to achieve the policy that has been provided to us. So what is that? And just quoting statute to me is not objective development at all for the plan. It's just saying what you already see in statute.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point of clarity there too, of, these objectives are specific to, yes, just the smoke management plan. So obviously they're going to be how they are implemented and how it's done is is addressed in the plan. So the more short, sweet, to the point we get in rule, we elaborate in that plan on how we can actually get there. And this will frame up what that new smoke management plan will be. Those that are familiar with the smoke management plan now have a lot more context probably of this section too. So this can frame up on what the future of that plan is. So based off of what I heard Trevor say is maybe not reference exactly what's in statute. And we do put in more what we think, but I also heard from Sarah, maybe we put a pin on what the smoke management plan objectives are while we work through the body of the document. I guess what I don't want to do though is have a lot of comments that just say circle back as we go through. But I think it's fair to have them as we work through. Hi. Especially when a bunch of people are watching me type. It's nerve-wracking. It's worse than public speaking. All right. Anybody screaming, saying no, don't move on? Okay. Necessity of prescribed burning. So again, so here's our reference to 005. So again, it's dropped down at the bottom here. So we do address 005 in the rules. And we had a few folks that wanted to add a few words here through this. So I'll let folks look over this paragraph. Any comments? This first sentence here is the only reference directly to that statute, for what it's worth. Anybody? Any threes? Amanda?
Well, I just had one other potential suggestion. I know somebody deleted the reintroduce fire on the landscape. I maintained that, but I followed it by saying at historic intervals. So kind of adding on this piece that fire's been on the landscape. Part of why we're reintroducing it, which is really prescribed burning, is to have it kind of tied back to that historic range of variability type interval comment. So I don't know if that's resonates with anybody.
That's historic. Historic intervals. Is that what you said?
Intervals. Yeah, historic intervals is what I said.
You have it kind of like that, or
No, I mean I just didn't delete that section and just said I just added it after at
oh, okay.
historic intervals, but
So you left.
But I don't disagree with restore healthy functioning ecosystems either.
So leave this. Randy, go ahead.
I'm sort of against that piece about the historical intervals, just because our forests are so different than they were over time. I'd just soon leave it kind of the way it was.
Got two recommendations. We need a third.
And Randy, to be clear, I'm like, I could take it or leave it. I really don't, it doesn't have to be in there for me. I didn't like having reintroduced fire on the landscape without kind of a qualifier in there if it was gonna it'd be retained. And just thinking about like tribal cultural fire and the fact that kind of prescribed fire has been a part of the landscape for a while. I was trying to kind of get to that point, but I'm happy with it not being there.
I think also then you run into the define what the historical interval is at some point. And I think that's, for the west side, people are saying it's 200 years, and I'm guessing that's not really the case in a lot of places.
So I'm hearing there's support of just removing it altogether, the reintroduce fire on the landscape. Sounds like it's not a 3. It sounds like, Amanda, maybe a 2 there. You can live with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be in there for me.
Okay. Anything else on that first paragraph from folks? Okay.
I gotta like read through this green because it's kind of difficult to read on my screen.
Oh, for wildfires. It demonstrates reduce potential for wildfires to spread and reduce their severity.
Just going to jump in, Levi, because I know you're not looking at the screens. We're looking at your other screen. I mean, I think I originally had suggested removing the spread piece. I don't claim to be an encyclopedia of all of the scientific publications out there, but what I would say is I don't know that there's a lot of evidence that it reduces spread. I think that there's some evidence that it can reduce subsequent fire severity. So I think in my original comments I had suggested just leaving it at reducing future wildfire severity, but that's even that statement is probably appropriate and backed up by good data in some systems, and in other systems not so much.
So and has been demonstrated to reduce the potential for wildfire severity, period.
I think, yeah, that's something along those lines.
See what it looks like.
But I'm, I don't know. I'm thinking of looking at other screens here. James, you know a lot of the published literature out there. What do you recall?
Yeah, I think you're accurate. I'm assuming green is still my comment, and I think what I had in mind was fire size. Just kind of with opportunities to suppress fires and prescribe fires on the landscape, the ability to prevent fires from growing large is greater. But I am perfectly happy with what you just proposed.
So, okay, I have prescribed burning is an important tool used to reduce forest fields, restore healthy functioning ecosystems, and has been demonstrated to reduce the potential for wildfire severity. The wildfire severity? Wildfire severity. Much smarter people that will fix that for us later. Anyone else?
I just had a question. So whether we say spread or I had added actually extent, but that's, kind of getting at the same thing. So, and I'm definitely not an expert in the literature. My mind kind of went to the same place as James in that having more of these treatments, kind of any treatments and even